It has been a mantra of U.S. foreign policy since 2003 that without the United States, the Middle East would descend into chaos. Or even worse, Iran would resurrect the Persian Empire and swallow the whole region. The first week of 2020 proved the absolute opposite. When Trump ordered the assassination of Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani, one of Iran's most important military figures, the region is once more moving toward conflict due to the malign presence of the U.S. in West Asia. Courtesy of Trump and his neocon buddies, even the signs of diplomatic progress achieved during the preceding months have vanished. It is thus time for the U.S. to answer a crucial question that it has long dodged. Has America's military dominance in the Middle East prevented regional actors from peacefully resolving conflicts on their own? If you ask ordinary inhabitants of West Asia, the absolute majority will answer yes. America's hegemonic military agenda in the Middle East has reached a dangerous threshold. The assassination of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Lieutenant General Soleimani that was ordered by the President of the United States is equivalent to an act of war against Iran. The Pentagon responded with a decision to send thousands of additional troops to the Middle East. Meanwhile, a unanimous vote in Iraq's parliament was reached demanding the immediate withdrawal of all U.S. forces. While a major U.S. force withdrawal is unlikely in the foreseeable future, America's war on terrorism is in jeopardy. Nobody believes that America is going after the terrorists anymore. Not that I ever did. The Yankee go-home process has commenced. With the last stunt Trump pulled in Iraq, the U.S. will not only be ousted from Iraq and Syria, its strategic presence in the broader Middle East has now also been threatened. Keeping in mind that the U.S. hegemony in the Middle East has been also weakened over the past decade as a result of the evolving structure of military alliances in West Asia, leading to the creation of the U.S.'s main foe, the Axis of Resistance. Welcome to the Middle East Stream. I'm Marwa Osman. The Trump administration has seriously disturbed and worsened regional conditions, singing it into tensions, turmoil, even wars not seen for many years. In the post-Cold War era, the U.S. has adopted a Middle East strategy aiming at exclusive U.S. domination, helping Israel grow stronger, orchestrating regime change in various countries, and looting ever more regional resources. To discuss this issue with us from London is Patrick Henningsen, founder of the 21st Century Wire. Thank you for being with us, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Marwa.
Now, in your words, Patrick, make no mistake, you said, what happened last week was historic, but not in the way that Washington and its punditry class are spinning it. For the first time ever, a state actor has attacked the United States, and the U.S. did not strike back. The region and the world may never be the same. Welcome to the new Middle East. Has the U.S. hegemony been broken for the first time since the Second World War?
I think clearly this is a watershed moment in geopolitics, Marwa. In terms of the Middle East, the only moment I think that rivals this is in October of 2015, when Russia entered the Syrian conflict, and that really gave a facelift to all sorts of geopolitical alignments in the region. Now what happened in the last 2 weeks is equally, if not more, historic. Above all, above worldview, above political paradigms, above ideologies, there are certain structural and strategic realities which shape U.S. grand strategy from region to region. And one of these very crucial factors is the medium-range missile capability of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so missile tech and also anti-aircraft technologies, the likes of which Russia has pioneered as well. This is also a major game changer in the Middle East. So the United States has really been exposed to a dangerous degree in the region, because anything within the radius of Iran's capabilities in terms of medium-range missile offense and defense, anything within that radius, that includes right to the Mediterranean, that includes the Arabian Peninsula, that includes all of the Gulf states, the GCC states, where the U.S. is has major military facilities as well. So the United States is not only exposed itself, but it's also exposed its allies in the process. And so you have countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, even Iraq, which the United States considered to be an ally, Iran is not shown is not afraid to act independently in its own security interests, but even on behalf of Iraq as well, that it considers an ally, because we have to remember it wasn't just General Qasem Soleimani who was assassinated on January 3rd. It was also Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, who was a major military figure in Iraqi circles. So, and a commander of the PMU, the People's Mobilization Units, that really turned the tide in the fight against ISIS. So this was also a clever target choice by Tehran to hit the U.S. facilities in Erbil, in Iraqi Kurdistan. This is effectively a U.S. protectorate that the United States has tried for 30 years to tear away from Iraq. And they've shown, Iran has shown that Iraqi Kurdistan is not an island on its own. It's not untouchable, that the U.S. can be got to even in their supposed stronghold.
Well, I want to talk to you about how it happened ever since the attack, or the retaliatory attack by the Islamic Republic of Iran on the Ain al-Assad base. What was very interesting and new to us all and to the world, especially to Twitter world, was that when news of the Iranian missile strike hit the headlines Tuesday evening, East Coast time, U.S. President Donald Trump went absolutely silent, not even one tweet. And then he was giving supposedly a press conference. He didn't give a press conference that night, no television speech, nothing. He waited till the second morning, 10 a.m., I think, East Coast time. And then he tweeted only once, saying that all is well. What do you think was happening then and there?
Well, clearly, Donald Trump was, in a way, breaking protocol. What would normally happen in that situation is the president would make a national address that evening to explain what had just happened, and then what the United States response was going to be. And clearly, by the reaction of the White House, by this president, by the U.S., they were absolutely caught on their back heels in this situation. So this game-changing move, this basically just caught the U.S. not only by surprise, but also its major ally in the region, Israel, I believe. And the most important crucial factor here was there was an announcement that actually was aired on Tasnim News, which is the Iranian news agency, whereby Hezbollah would be treating the United States and Israel as one single entity or one belligerent. And I think at that point in the evening, it probably became clear at the White House that this isn't going to be an isolated affair. If there is retaliation, it will also include its allies in the region like Israel. And I think that gave pause to people in Tel Aviv and to people in Washington that evening that is not wise to escalate, that maybe this is going to have to end here for now. But again, it exposed something that a lot of people thought about and knew about, but now it became a practical reality, that there are strategic problems with the United States posture in the region, that it's exposed, and its allies as well.
True to that, but there was also something else that was circulating, and it still is circulating all across the media, whether regional or international media, that it's since been revealed that the Iranian side had notified the Iraqi prime minister at least 6 hours before the attack. One might argue that Tehran did this in order to respect international law, to respect Iraq's sovereignty, and I think that's the case here. But it's unrealistic to believe that the Islamic Republic of Iran would risk losing the element of surprise if it really intended to kill or harm American troops inside of Iraq and cross Trump's supposed threatened red line here. But can we safely say that Iran did not actually want any casualties, but rather wanted to teach the U.S. a lesson and tell them, we are here, we're not going to stay silent anymore, and if you hit us, we'll hit you back?
Well, you only have to look at the response by the Iranian foreign minister, Zarif, who was very clear that the country was acting within the bounds of Article 51 of the UN Charter. In other words, giving proportional response to an act of aggression by the United States. And what this showed here was that Iran is prepared to abide by international law, for starters, when the United States is not. And it shows that Iran is the rational actor in this story. And the international community tends to favor the rational actors. Why? Because rational actors in international relations are predictable. And people can work with predictable factors in the international arena. So the United States is now the rogue actor. Iran is the rational actor, much like Russia has been so often the rational actor doing exactly what it says it was going to do. Iran has followed in the footsteps of Moscow in this instance and done exactly that. So I think that's also historic, because now it's flipped the narrative of sorts internationally that Iran is this rogue state and so forth. And they've really shown Washington up in this instance by a proportional response and by minimizing U.S. casualties. For all intents and reports so far, 0 U.S. casualties. So absolutely a strategic strike by Tehran, and precise as well. And I think that also probably surprised U.S. pundits, U.S. officials, foreign policy experts. They weren't expecting.
Well, in one more minute before we end off with you, Patrick, we have now been witnessing relative calm in the region after the very tense couple of weeks that began and kick-started with the new year 2020. Do you think that the tit-for-tat is now over between Iran and the U.S., or maybe it's just they're holding off right now and maybe Iran's allies would have another say in this?
I don't think it's over. I don't think it's over. And, you know, these last 2 weeks really are a prelude to a potential war going forward. I think Israel continues to hit Syria with impunity, strikes in what it calls Iranian targets, PMU targets on the Iraqi-Syrian border as well. The Israelis, even the Saudis, the United States are probably going to still target these facilities and sort of provoke and prod Iran to look for a reaction. And also I predict that ISIS might also magically appear possibly in Iraq. That would, of course, justify a continued U.S. presence in that country. So this is far from over. There is still a lot of moving parts and potential provocations going forward. And so it will be very tense.
Patrick Henningsen, founder of the 21st Century Wire, thank you very much for being with us and talking to us about the regional developments. I want to thank you for being with us, and please stay tuned for our upcoming next segment. Sidqi Al-Maqt's freedom is a live example that 32 years of imprisonment in Israeli detention centers have only proven that wounds rule over knives, and that prisoners can free themselves from confinement through their steadfastness. A legendary hero from the Syrian Golan grasps freedom in this following report. The Israeli regime released 2 Syrian detainees last week as part of a swap deal brokered by Russia. The legendary hero Sidqi Al-Maqt, the Syrian Nelson Mandela, was freed on January 10 from the apartheid occupation prisons after 32 years of arbitrary detention. Sidqi Al-Maqt from the Druze community in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, which were illegally annexed last year by the Israeli regime, was incarcerated in 2015 and sentenced to 11 years for allegedly spying, treason, and transferring information to the Syrian government. He had already spent decades behind bars in Israeli detention centers. Authorities also announced the early release of another Syrian Golan Heights resident, Amal Abu Salah, who was jailed for the alleged murder of a Syrian who crossed the Syrian border towards occupied Palestine to become a spy for Israel and had been due to remain behind bars until 2023. For the last 50 years, Israel has imprisoned and tortured Syrians in an attempt to annex the Golan and steal its oil. It is one long history that should be retold every chance we have to remind the world of the Israeli crimes. In 1967, Israel invaded the Syrian Golan Heights and set fire to 340 villages and farms. The residents fled, becoming internally displaced persons. 5 Druze villages survived, and for the next 50 years, they would live in an open-air prison separated from their families by a demilitarized zone. If Syrians are to leave the Golan Heights, they would be unable to return, as Israel would lock them out, which is why the current residents of the occupied Golan see remaining on the land of their ancestors as a form of resistance. They talk to family members separated by the demilitarized zone on Shouting Hill, also named as the Hill of Tears. In an attempt to prevent families from staying connected to the Syrian identity, Israel rigged Shouting Hill with landmines. People have lost limbs, but still they come back. In the war of 1973, Syria was able to liberate parts of the Golan Heights from Israeli occupation. One of the villages liberated was Quneitra. Syria decided to leave it in ruin as a historic testament of Israeli barbarism that tried to wipe out the Golan population. Syrians who tried to resist Israeli occupation become prisoners of war, one of which was Syria's patriot hero Sidqi Al-Maqt, who spent 32 years in Israeli jail. As soon as he got out, he took pictures of the Israeli occupation forces hanging out with Al-Qaeda, so Israel sentenced him to another 15 years until he gained his freedom again last week under his own terms of returning to his village of Majd al-Shams in the Golan to continue his path of resistance against the Israeli occupation. To discuss the issue of liberation of Sidqi Al-Maqt with us from Toronto is, with us from Montreal is Laith Marouf, expert in Middle East politics. Thank you very much for being with us, Laith, and félicitations. Congratulations for the liberation of Sidqi Al-Maqt. 32 years later, Syrian detainee Sidqi Al-Maqt is free from Israeli incarceration and is back to his beloved village Ain al-Shams in the occupied Syrian Golan. I don't want to sound a bit pessimistic here, but will Israel actually allow him to enjoy his freedom under their noses in the occupied territories?
Well, Sidqi Al-Maqt never asked apartheid Israel for permission to resist their occupation of his land ever, and he doesn't need to ask them again, and it's expected that he will never ask them for that permission, and he will continue to resist. And we know from the history of this man that was arrested when he was 18 years old and spent 27 years after that in the gulags of apartheid Israel. And as we know also that when he stepped out of that imprisonment in 2012, he went back to resisting apartheid Israel. And he was arrested a second time in 2015 after filming apartheid Israel military aiding the Wahhabi Contras of Al-Qaeda Nusra Front in southern Syria. He filmed the ambulances that were taking the wounded of Al-Qaeda and giving them medical aid in the hospitals of apartheid Israel. And without that proof that he presented to the world, it would have been hard to convince people that apartheid Israel is directly involved in the war against Syria and supporting the Wahhabi death squads. And I'm sitting here in Montreal in Canada, and we know that apartheid Israel took out the white helmets and the other Al-Qaeda assets from the Golan Heights, and now tens of them are sitting safely here in Canada, where the state of this country is given new identities to the Al-Qaeda and white helmets activists that were occupying Syria.
Well, Sidqi was offered freedom in December 2019 before last week, but he refused it because it was under Israeli preconditions, and the precondition was that he would go straight to Damascus and not set foot in his village, Ain Shams, in occupied Golan Heights. But as we know Sidqi and his resistance, he did not accept that. How do you assess the refusal of Sidqi to be released under Israeli conditions, and then 1 month later, just 1 month later, he gets released, he gets his freedom back under his own terms?
Shows you how much respecting oneself and one's sovereignty against a usurping, occupying enemy like apartheid Israel is very important. This man, Sidqi Al-Maqt, who's the admiral, basically, of Syrian prisoners of war, has shown us, the whole world, how to stand against your oppressor and refuse their colonial dictates. So now he's free in his own land, and he is going to continue for sure to expose the crimes of apartheid Israel.
This is what interests me. Sidqi Al-Maqt is deemed to be, as you said, the admiral of the Syrian detainees, since he spent more than 25 years, actually 32 years in Israeli detention centers. And this reminds us of the admiral of liberated detainees, the martyr Samir al-Qantar, who also spent in detention 29 years, but he vowed the moment of his liberation in 2008, he vowed to return to Palestine. And I would choose that he actually did do so, since he was assassinated in Damascus, where he was actually planning and organizing resistance to liberate Palestine, to start the liberation from Quneitra into Palestine as well, but Israel assassinated him in Damascus. Samir is Lebanese, Sidqi is Syrian, and Palestine lived through their resistance and their liberation movement. How do you explain this factor, knowing that you have followed numerous cases of Arab detainees within the Israeli occupation detention centers?
Well, liberation of any Arab land requires us to liberate Palestine. This is not hyperbole, it's actual physical need. There is a beachfront of the empire in Palestine for the last 100 years has been forcing the chopping up of Arab geography and making sure that Arabs do not physically, culturally unite against colonization from the West. And add to that, the fact is that Palestine and Lebanon and Syria are just one cultural zone, subculture within the Arabic culture. And, Palestine is in the heart of every Syrian, every Lebanese, every Jordanian, every Iraqi, every Arab. And these people, like Sidqi Al-Maqt, resemble to all of us this connection in actual physical form of resistance. So the liberation of Palestine is crucial for the liberation of Syria and liberation of Lebanon and the liberation of Arabs in general.
Well, the Druze community in the occupied Golan have suffered tremendously from the Israeli occupation and continuous incarceration of their kids, of their families, and lately from annexation as well. Their land was annexed by the Israeli entity with the blessing, obviously, of the Trump administration in the U.S. Yet this community has been loyal to Syria, loyal to the Syrian command as well, and has always shown steadfastness for Syria and pro-Syria. Some analysts say that the Golan and its community will actually be the spark that it will ignite the region with Israel. What do you say about that?
I think it's a very sure thing. The people in the Golan Heights, the Syrian citizens, majority of them are Druze, that are under occupation, have resisted mental and social colonization by apartheid Israel, and they refused citizenship when it was offered to them. Because they know that their state, their nation, the wider Arab liberation requires them to be steadfast and to be the spearhead against the continued expansion of apartheid Israel. And looking at the tectonic shifts that is happening in the region in the past months, we know that direct confrontation with American occupation and Israeli occupation is closer than we think.
I want to thank you very much from Montreal, Laith Marouf, expert in Middle East politics. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your contribution to our show. And thank you for watching. Please stay tuned next week for more from the Mideast Stream.